We are back again with Blessing for another session on chatting. Um, if you've watched our previous session, you would know that Blessing and I always have these discussions about the brain, about life, and this is what this is about. So I'm so excited to be back again with another session with Blessing, with Dr. Blessing Enakimio, and today we're going to be continuing on the whole path of goals, goal setting, goal achievement, and linking it to the brain and scripture. So, Blessing, it's great to be back again with you.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. And like she has said, we are here to have lovely conversations. We want to hear from you as well. So please do put in your comments, any questions you might have around goals, and not just about setting goals, because we all know how to set goals. It's about achieving those goals that we have set. That's the key point here, is that we are talking about how to achieve our set goals, how to set them, yes, but also how to achieve them. So do post in your comments any questions you might have around this topic.
Awesome. So let's do it. Like I explained before in the previous one, Blessing has a way of asking or tasking my brain. She asks me questions that really makes me think and linking it to science. So I'm going to say, Blessing, over to you.
Are you sure? Are you sure? Over to me.
Go for it. My
Okay,
brain is
good.
ready.
Good. Right. Maureen's brain. Here we go. All right. So last time we talked about setting goals and we explored a few things, but I want to go deeper today. Give you an example. Before I go to bed every night, I do clearly set out what my goals are for the next day. So I think it through and I write down what I'm going to achieve. So almost like a task list. I have a book next to my bed. Sometimes I would type it on my phone and then transfer it to my notebook so that it's double written. But yesterday, I didn't do that last night. And I woke up this morning. I remembered exactly the two things I wanted to do. I didn't write it down. So I did everything I needed to do, did my morning duties, dropped my kids off at school, got to my office, and was ready to achieve these two tasks. I put my computer on and I thought, okay, I'll just do a couple of emails. I moved on, answered a few calls, joined a few meetings. Up till now, Maureen's brain, I haven't done what I set out to do. Why?
Okay. Now let's ask Blessing's brain something. Now, Blessing's brain, do you know why you wanted to do these two goals?
Yes, they're quite important tasks I need to complete. Yeah, I know why.
So now tell me, Blessing's brain, why were you putting these two goals off and focusing on something else? And what was it you were actually, first of all, what were you telling Blessing? I'm talking to the brain now. What were you telling Blessing while you were, and why were you telling her that? And what were you getting her to do or, telling her to do?
Okay, so the tasks I want to complete are new and they're big. And I kept saying, I think it's easier to just complete the email. It'll only take me a minute to do the email. Emails don't take long, it's easy to respond. And whilst I was responding to one, I had an idea about something else. So I created another email and I just kept going on and followed that route really. I suppose it's easier to do them. They're easier to respond to emails and do that as opposed to doing these two things I want to do.
So why is it easier to do the emails than these two? Why?
The two are more time consuming. It's going to require me to come up with some stuff. So I need to do a little bit more of research. I need to do it in a particular format, how the organization want me to do it. So it's something I have to do, not necessarily want to do.
I think you've answered your question. So there are a few things that came out from there. And if you
Okay.
know, for the listeners, you could see I was addressing her brain, and I was doing that intentionally because a lot of times we forget that our behavior, our actions are really driven by what's going on in our brain. So what Blessing said is that she had two tasks, and they were big and they're new. Now we know that the brain doesn't necessarily like new things. Not that it doesn't like new things, but it's foreign to it. So for the brain to deal with something new, it's going to need some energy, basically. And 95% of what we do is by our subconscious brain. So we don't even need to think about it. Now, if we're going to do something new, something different, then it needs our consciousness, it needs our conscious brain, and we
Mhm.
need to you need to give it energy. And if we live like that, really on our conscious brain, we will not survive, because we'll be literally, the brain will be using all the energy that comes in. At the moment it uses about 20, and it will really be consuming a lot more. So to
Mhm.
conserve energy, it uses the subconscious brain. Is what is it's that's where autopilot is. That's where we're able to function without thinking. So for Blessing, it was new and it was big. These two things the brain would try to keep you away from. Why? Because it perceives it as something different. Could even perceive it as a threat, depending on what you've the narrative that you've
Mhm.
created around these goals, which is what I'm going to ask you in a second. You did
Mhm.
say it's time consuming. That's one of the narratives. You've got to do some more research. That's another narrative. Also,
Mhm.
you might have created some other narratives. If you can think about some, you can give us as examples.
I think in my head I'm thinking, oh, not this again. It's hard. It's almost like when you want to submit something and you don't know if it's going to be accepted. You have to redo it again. How do you want it? How do they not want it? It's not in my control really to decide what the final output is going to look like. It's all that really.
Yeah, out of your control. Can you see? That's the
Mm,
other thing, which the subconscious brain does, which our brain doesn't like. Our brain likes being in control, so it's out of
mm,
control. It's hard. Not this again. Can you see the narratives that have been created around it? So what would the subconscious brain do? It will give you reasons why you
mm,
should put it aside and do
mm,
what's easier, do what it's comfortable with, do what it knows, which is emails. And you see, once you get
mm,
distracted and move off into something else, one thing will lead to another, and you're off track and not doing what you
mm,
want to do. Now, there's something else you mentioned about writing them down. Right, that normally you write down, but you didn't write these down. Talk to
mm.
us a bit about that.
You see, I think I've come to understand there's something cathartic about writing, where which you probably tell us a bit more. Maybe there's a connection between my hand all the way to my brain, but when I write, I hold myself accountable to what I have written, and I always have a book with me where I write my
Mm,
stuff down. And it's always in front of me, open on the page that I'm working on. So whatever task I have written down, it's here. So as I go along through the day, I check my task and I tick it off. I love ticking it off, and it makes me feel more fulfilled. It kind
mm.
of gives me a bit more positive energy to keep going, and I work quicker under pressure. But I didn't write this down. I don't know why I didn't write it down. I don't know if that's the problem, or whether I don't even want to do the task, so I didn't write it down. I haven't got a clue, but I didn't write it down, and I haven't done it.
Okay, I love that. And I think, in fact, the way you're kind of unfolding it is a good one for all of us and for everyone listening as well. Because you said you didn't write it down. You're not sure why you didn't write it down. I think if we go further, you do know why you wrote it down, or why you didn't write it down rather. But what I would say is, it's interesting that you said you normally would write down, and you like ticking off because you like working under pressure. So, and that's the adrenaline. satisfaction, that reward,
Mm,
that you've done it, you've ticked it off. Now you did not write it down, which is now something different from what your
mm,
brain normally would do. So that is also something different that your brain would then perceive to be uncertain, and it will want you to ignore. And that's why you need to really be alert to, or self-aware. You need to be self-aware. How do I work best? How do I work best? How have I wired myself to work best? Because you write down, I would say keep doing that if that works for you. Especially
mm,
when you need to do something that is quite different, I would say write it down. Even if you're feeling sleepy, just take a notebook and just write it. I normally do that at the side of my bed. Even in darkness, I'll write it so it's there. And because you get the reward from ticking off,
mm.
give your brain that, because that will help you. Now, and it's so important for everyone to understand how they work best. For some, it might be writing down. And like you said, what does science say about it? There are different
Mm,
researches that go along with writing or not writing. And I have read research and it makes sense that, when you're writing, because there's an action going on, the nerves and information then goes up into the brain and connects to our conscious brain, that actually helps. And you said it gives you a kind of satisfaction. So there's a wiring in the brain that you've already created as well. So satisfying that would enable you achieve or work towards what you want to achieve. That's
okay.
one thing. For somebody else, it might be different. For new generation, I would say they're good at using their thumb or fingers, and that might actually be sending the same information because that's what they know. So I think it's just paying attention to how you are, how you've wired yourself, and working with that. And I think, hopefully I can, if you remind me before we finish, to
Mm-hmm.
really talk about being open to changing as well, because that's important. But in terms of what you want to do, I would say, because these are big projects, because you are aware that it's new and your brain might try and stop you, intentionally, purposefully write it down, because you know that that works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yes, it
Yeah.
does. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at this now practically. Let's say I've written it down.
Mhm.
Let's just assume that I did, like I always do. And then the day goes along. How do I make sure I actually do it?
Hmm. So I like that. You've written it down. Then
Mm-hmm.
the question then is, why? How do you do it? Let's carry on with this narrative, in the sense
Okay.
that you've written it down, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not. It's something that you've already created a narrative that it's hard. It's out of
Mm-hmm.
your control. Not
Mm-hmm.
this again. So I think it's important to now pay attention to the narratives that you're giving things or
Mm-hmm.
situations. Pay
Okay.
attention to those. And if you've given a negative narrative, it's time to reframe that. That's really important, because that will help you in terms of actually doing what you need to do. One of the other things is big. Now you said it's big, or it's a lot. You said it's going to be time consuming. If it's going to be time consuming, how do you break it down? Now, I'm going to use you. You said you like ticking off. It gives you that reward. If that's the case, break it down into
Mm.
manageable chunks, so that you can finish one aspect and get that reward, get that dopamine, so that you can then continue with the next stage. And what you could have done, or one option you could have done, is, even if you did not write it down, even if you are so tired that you really couldn't be bothered to write down, you could even think in your brain as well and plan. that, okay,
Mm,
by maybe 9:30 to 10:30, I'm going to work on this part of this project. Maybe project one, I'm going to work on it for an hour and then
mm,
take a break. So it's literally planning. And then in the morning when you get up, because you like writing, write it between this time and this time. Just break it down what you're literally going to do, and
mm,
then stick to it. And this is where it becomes important to be intentional, because will you try to avoid doing it? Yes. Why?
mm.
Because it's new, because it's uncertain. So this is where the action about you actually taking intentional actions becomes important.
Okay. So if we think about what you just said now, you have mentioned that we have to be intentional with each task, pay attention to our narratives, whether they're positive or negative. And I think that's a very important thing. Where I have maybe written tasks down, that's not been a problem, but I don't pay attention to the narrative behind the task. It's never
Mm,
really mattered. I just bulldoze through it. But I think that's a lesson for me as well now to learn, is that I have to pay attention to the narrative that I'm telling myself around the task, and also the why. And also
yeah.
the why, because that has an impact. Because if, for instance, I was positive or feeling positive about it, I might not procrastinate so much.
Absolutely. You most likely would not procrastinate so much. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how do we then deal with the fact that, okay, I've got this task to do? Again, we're talking about achieving our goals here. And these goals are not necessarily just the big ones. It's not necessarily the ones you're achieving or your annual goals. We're talking about on a daily basis. If you can achieve your daily goals, I suppose at the end of the year, you would have achieved your annual goals. So on a daily basis, how do we remain on track? What sort of practical steps can we take, considering the world we live in with social media, the distractions that are out there? You just need to open LinkedIn, whatever it is, and you start to see everybody else living their best life, because no one puts on their struggles, really. Everyone is living their best life. And then you look in on yourself and think, that's not happening. That's not my narrative. How do we stay on track and not run off with the supposed success we find on social media?
Yeah, I think that's really a good question and an important one. And it comes back to what you said, really understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And I always come back to the fact that to do that, we've got to really go back to basics and say, okay, for me as a Christian, what is my vision? And what's
Mm,
God's vision for me, most importantly? Because for me as a person, if it's just looking at what I want, it almost becomes a bit of detachment from God's will for me. So it's really connecting to what God's will is for me, because when God says that when He calls us, He equips us. So with
mm,
that, it almost creates the calmness, the assurance that my brain needs, the confidence that it needs to know that as long as I'm walking in God's will, yes, things might be challenging, things might be tough, but He's with me, and He said that He would be
mm,
with me. So it's really coming back to the foundation, the anchor, and then starting from there. So with that, I then create my plans, my little goals. Breaking them down into chunks is so important, because
mm,
we all like that reward. It's, we like the feeling of achieving something is so powerful. And it's that emotion, that feeling of reward, of satisfaction, of, yeah, I've done it. That is what we would then remind our brain that we've done this, we've achieved this, so we can achieve the next step. But when you
mm,
focus on the big goal, then it can get
mm,
overwhelming for our brain, because it's huge. Just like you said, these are two projects. You said big, you said new. Those two things will create overwhelm for most of our
mm,
brains. So it's better to break them down. So one of the things you mentioned, which I feel is so powerful, is the night before you actually think about what you're going to do the next day and write it down. And that's really great. The reason why is that it gives your brain clarity. It gives your brain certainty, which it needs in terms of what it's going to do the next day. Now, you can even break it down into when you're going to do it. That helps as well. You might not actually do it to that exact time, but it gives you a something to work with. And it's better to not overdo it. Don't give yourself too many goals in a day. Just, and also you can do the big goals in the, at the top, and then the next ones that follow, and then the nice to do ones, or if you've got time. But the must do, keep them at the top. The ones that you really must achieve that day, you can put them at the top. And it's always best to put maybe one big one a day, not two. Just so it's really looking at different ways of working to break it down to give you that reward. But planning is so important, and actually taking time to celebrate your wins when you do achieve them in the day. Now, the other thing I'll say before I stop is that as much as you're planning for the next day, I would say before you even plan for the next day, review or reflect on your day. Before, at the end of the day, reflect on it and celebrate what you've done. Find out what worked, what did not work. And it might not even be anything big. It might just be lying in bed and doing it. And then maybe something comes up that you need to write down that you can then put in for the next day. But I would say review your day and then plan for the next day. And there are so many other things you can do, but I think these are so important to just give your brain that clarity, and then it's taking the action that needs to be taken, to actually do them.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you for that. So reflect on your day. Very, very good to reflect. It's very good because then you go through it. And again, reflection can be one of those things that can be tricky. So don't reflect from a negative point of view. I suppose that's back to what you were saying about pay attention to your narrative, because sometimes when we reflect, we beat ourselves up. And in doing that, I don't think that serves anybody. There's not much you can do about what has happened.
It's a wiring. So as you're beating yourself up, saying, oh, I didn't do this. Oh, I should have. That's a wiring. And that's a negative wiring that will then be reinforced so that the next day, when you want to do that task, what it's picking up is that negativity that you've wired in before. That, oh, it's difficult. I didn't get it. I didn't achieve it. And your brain will try and keep you away from going back to something that hasn't made you happy anyway, to something that is easy to do. So yes, good point.
Yeah. Okay. So we reflect and then we celebrate, celebrate small wins. However it is that works. For me, ticking it off the list literally means I can look back and say, okay, I have all of this and I can cross it off. I tick, 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 tick. And at the end of the day, I do a big cross across the whole page. And I'm like, yeah, God blessing. And as little as that is, it's quite rewarding for me. So tell us in the comments, how do you reward yourself? How do you celebrate your small wins? It would be nice to know how others are doing it. And then we can share that as well within the community. So how do you set your tasks, maybe your daily tasks? How do you reward yourself for achieving them? It's quite important to know. Okay, my next question really is going to be around goal setting as we have it. We always look at it, but a lie, I have come to learn, is not the opposite of the truth. And I'm going somewhere, bear with me. A lie is a perversion of the truth. So if you even look at it in the scriptures, at the beginning, with Adam and Eve, the conversation that we're having, it was, oh, but he didn't say we shouldn't really eat the fruit, did he? There was all these connotations, and it's the perversion. It wasn't really the opposite. So let's consider that for a second. The lie is not the opposite, but the perversion. Now bring that into our goal setting. When we have set out to go to destination A and we veer off on a different path and maybe there's a diversion or whatever, and we keep going. If we don't know where we're going to then divert back to our original destination, we're very unlikely to get to where we were going. How do we deal with the current world we live in, with the vast amount of distractions we have? Just take only social media as it is. How do we focus on our goals and not be distracted by everything we see on social media?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. You see, I think it becomes important to come back to what I said previously in terms of the goals you're setting. Because what a lot of people tend to do is it's time to set goals. Oh, I need to, start writing the goals down. Now, these goals are your goals and based on your own understanding, based on your own limitations, based on your own experiences. But if you can just take that back to really spending time to ask God, what is your vision for me? What are your goals for me? What goals do you want me to set for, moving forward, able to do what you want me to do? That really creates a deep anchor for you and also creates a deep wiring and connects to your emotional brain and keeps reminding you, because that becomes your why of doing it. And that is what will keep reminding you of where you're going. And it's almost like setting out on a journey and having an end destination of where you're going to. Now, you know that you're going from A to E. And a lot of times we could have the GPS that tells us this is the way to go. But when you set off on that journey, you might then find that one road is blocked and you've got to really navigate to create a different pathway. But if you don't have that navigation to direct you, what might end up happening is that you go off a route and maybe get lost. And going off that route could be looking on social media and seeing that, okay, this is where I'm going to, but oh gosh, see what that person is doing. And it seems to be working for them. Okay. And before you know it, you've moved and started moving to somebody else's lane, doing what somebody else is doing. Worst case scenario, sometimes you have, like I said, a lot of times we start setting goals for the year. A lot of times you're not setting goals for you, you're setting somebody else's goals because you've seen that, oh, this is set, or that person is doing this. And a lot of times it's very subconscious because you might not even realize that you're not setting your own goals. The information that you're taking in from social media, from news, from family, upbringing, culture, all these things really end up forming something in you that makes you believe that this is your goal, but it's not. It's actually somebody else's, or society's, not even yours. So this is why it's important to take that time to reflect on you and the why, to keep you on track where you're going. And remember that somebody else doing what they're doing, it's their goal, it's their life. So it's telling your brain, that's good, but I need to, this is where I'm going. This is why I'm going here. This is what God has asked me to do. This is what I'm being called to do. So this is, I need to come back here. And it also helps us realize when we've moved off, because it can happen. But if you're not that self-aware, you might not even realize that you're meant to be going to Leeds and you're in France. And you might not even realize that you're in France and then end up in Germany. And before you know it, the year is over and you're wondering, what happened to all the goals? And because they were not yours. So I think in answer to your question, it's being very alert, first of all, knowing that's God's vision for you, know where you're going, have that goal at the beginning, and it doesn't have to begin of the year, anytime, just set have it, know it, hold on to it, and the more you keep reviewing it, the more you keep reflecting on it, the more it keeps getting wired into your brain, so that if you move off course or get distracted by somebody else, because you've wired that into your subconscious, it will alert you. You would know quite quickly before you get to France that, girl, you're moving off track here.
True. And I think from what you're saying, it's key to mention. It's about remembering to remember, I suppose. Know your why. We owe it to ourselves to know our why. It's not up to anybody else to remind us of our why. We have to hold ourselves accountable to our why. Why are you doing what you're doing? When that influence comes along, don't just accept it and think, oh, it's all better because that person is doing it. That person isn't you. You are you, and you are unique. And how you would deliver it is unique. It's like if you give a recipe to two people, they'll come up with following the same recipe. Each person comes up with their own outcome. Why? Because everybody's gifting is different, and how you deliver is different, and it's okay. So how do we get comfortable with being okay with ourselves? How do we get comfortable being okay with ourselves?
Do you know, I asked that question while we were starting our Mindsight Women's Network. Because and I think in one of the sessions, if you remember, we actually did this whole thing of identity. So how can we get comfortable with being yourself? I believe it really comes back to knowing who you are, knowing your identity. Because when you know who you are, that is where the confidence, the assurance of who you are then comes in. So it's knowing who you are, knowing where you're going. You see, because what really creates uncertainty, what really creates problems, or that lack of assurance, is not knowing. It's I suppose it's not knowing fully, not knowing who you are, basically, or not having the certainty of who you are, or not. Okay, let me put it this way. Let's use the journey, going on a journey to, if I'm going on a flight to US, maybe I'm going to Washington. If I don't have the knowledge of where I'm going, maybe somebody has booked my ticket for me and says, okay, you're coming over here to speak, and I get the ticket and don't even look at the ticket of where I'm going. And they've booked me to go out from Gatwick Airport, and I end up, because most flights go from Heathrow, I end up at Heathrow. I'll miss my flight.
True.
So it's knowing, it's that assurance of, just opening the ticket to go, okay, it's Heathrow, it's this terminal, it's this time. That gives me confidence, and then I can plan. Okay, this is where I live. I might need 2 hours to get there, so I've got to plan my day. What time I'll leave, how I'll get there, and all that. So that's where the assurance comes from. Now, why I come back to identity is that in this age we live in, there are lots of distractions. There's a lot of noise. So if you're not sure of who you are, if you don't know where, who you belong to, it's easy to kind of keep swaying, from one place to another, because people will tell you who you're meant to be. I remember someone telling me what I should be posting on social media. And when I said, no, that's not my area, this person got so cross with me. I couldn't, that you should. And I'm going, should. Who are you to tell me what I should be posting? You see, but if I wasn't sure and convinced and know confidently where I was going, honestly, I would have been so distracted. I would have gone off on that path, completely off track for me. But because it was her path, she obviously felt that should be mine, and maybe everybody else's.
That's the thing, isn't it? Positive projection, where we put onto others that which we think of ourselves, and it's important to, in as much as we try not to do it to others, you can't control others doing it to you. So you must be able to see it when it comes. You must be alert And always check. Even the Bible says check every spirit, test every spirit. You know, you must be able to check. You know, I saw myself in a message I was saying to someone a few days ago. Yes, I know that that's what you would like, but that's not what I offer. And this is what I offer. A, B, C, D, E.
Yes.
And it's as simple as that. And I felt such a release. I felt so free from the burden of trying to solve this person's problem. I'm not your solution. That's not what I do. There must be someone who does that. But this is if you have this problem, come along. I can help you solve it because that's the solution I offer. And it's about being clear, even as businessmen and women, what it is our offering is. And I think that's what brings us to that niche. The more you niche, you know, if we go down that path just a little, and we'll come back to where we are, but just go down the niching path for a little. If you have a child who has an emergency eye problem, are you likely to take your, let's say, 10-year-old to a GP who is a general doctor, general practitioner? Or would you go for what do you call an eye doctor? I don't know.
An optician, ophthalmologist.
Exactly. Or but would you go for a pedio one? Wouldn't you? If there's a pedio optometrist, you would rather they saw that person than going to a GP. Why? Because not only do they specialize in the eyes, they specialize in children's eyes. Exactly. So that's where your niche comes in. And this is why we talk a lot about niching in business. But niching is another word of saying focus. What are you focusing on? What is the problem you are focusing on solving? Because the more you solve it, yes, you can offer all the peripherals and all the surrounding bits as additional add-ons, but being focused on your focus is our key point. Focus.
I like that.
On your focus. If there's nothing you take away from us today, we want you to take that. Focus on your focus.
Yeah. I like that. Focus on your focus. Yeah. That's true. That's true. I like that.
And I think it's easy to know when you're not. One, the Holy Spirit within you will tell you you're kind of off track. Yeah. But also, if you are constantly checking your why, checking the tasks you have to do, you would stop saying yes to everything.
Yeah. I like that because I like that because when you constantly reflect on your why, you're wiring it into your brain. And so that when somebody comes to tell you to do something, you're then able immediately to know this is not my path. And that is where the confidence then comes for you to be able to say no without feeling bad or feeling guilty. You know, so that question of confidence, that's it as well. It's, you know, you have to know where you're going. You have to know who you are. You've got to know it, you know, because if somebody, you know, goes to your house and, you know, tries to open your door to come in and doesn't live there, you challenge them. You know, or even they probably would not even feel confident to come in. They might try and sneak in, but they can't come in confidently. But when I'm going to my home, I'm confident. I've got my key. I walk confidently to my home. And that's why it's so important to know who you are. And who you are becomes important because challenges will come. Issues will come. Life happens. But it's knowing. You know, it's that knowing who I am in God, who God says I am, what he says I can do. And that's the confidence to really be able to stand and keep moving, even when there's a lot of obstacles, challenges. It's then trying to find the other way to go to get to where I need to get to without going off course. So,
Yeah, so true. And when you've written these things down and you've made those decisions, you've reflected, you've celebrated, and okay, the day has come, it's now time to do it. One thing that we always say is choose to do it. It's
Choose.
it's
Yeah.
always a choice at the end of the day,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether I
Yeah.
choose to send the
Yeah.
emails,
Yeah.
or whether I choose to
Yeah.
do what I've set out to do today, whether I choose to postpone what I want to do today till tomorrow, whether I want to spend time on Netflix, whether I choose to spend time on Facebook. It's a choice.
Yeah.
God gave us the right to choose. If he
Yeah.
felt it important enough to give it to us as a right to choose, we might as well use it. Choose choice, isn't it? He gave us life, he gave
Yeah.
us death. He didn't leave it at
Yeah.
that. He said, but choose life. So when you've given yourself the task to do, choose to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that, because when just like you described the scenario you gave at the beginning, where you knew you had to do it, but you chose not to. The brain suggested, but
Yes.
you made the choice of
Yes.
what you were going to do. You made the choice to go to emails. And
Mm.
yes, we've talked around the narratives. Yes, the narratives create the opportunity for us to make a decision, but we still have the choice of take the
Spot on.
actions that we take. And that's
Spot on.
so important for you to remember that, because a lot of times people become victims of their brain, or become victims of their wiring, or become victims of their thoughts. Don't be a victim of your thoughts or wiring. It's be intentional. And it brings us back to you taking the control of your brain. And the way to take control is to be intentional about what you do. Because when you take actions, your brain will wire towards those actions. When you create a thought, your brain then wires that thought. The more you think or the more you act, you're creating new neural pathways that then over time become easy. And I always say, see, never forget that when you started driving, if you drive, at the early stage, it was challenging because you had to think of different things. Blessing and I, in one of the new another sessions we're going to talk about swimming and the brain. But I will leave that for now because it's an interesting one. But just driving, your brain, it's new, so it's got to think of different things. But the more you do it, the more you're wiring your brain to do it, it becomes easy. So the choice of driving, I want to learn how to drive because I want to be able to move around freely. I want to be able to move around and put on my heater when it's cold. I don't want to be standing out in the cold. And that would be the motivation to continue. So even though it's difficult, even though it's challenging, I'll keep doing it because it's going to be beneficial to me. What's the end goal? And that's the same process. So don't be a victim of life, if I put it that way. Be intentional by taking the actions, even though you don't feel like it. Still do it.
True, because your feelings are never going to cooperate with your dreams. They never will. They're not there for that. So you choose to do the task you've set out. And I think in anything you're doing, any goal that you're setting, if you can achieve your daily goals, you're likely to achieve your weekly goals, then you're likely to achieve your monthly goals, then your annual goals and your life goals. So practice achieving your daily goals. We've given you quite simple tools to use here, and we hope that they are of benefit to you. But we also would like to invite you to join the Mindset Women's Network, where we are taking on a 90-day journey to set achievable goals and to achieve these goals. We'll hold each other accountable, we'll learn as we go. And at the end of the 90 days, we'll all be smiling because we have achieved our goals. I'll let Maureen tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. You see, what we've been discussing is really about goal setting, goal achievement. And like I said, a lot of times people just write the goals down. What we'll be doing in these 90 days is going back to basics to start from the foundation of who am I? Why am I setting these goals? What goals do I need to, what goals should I be setting? And then how is my brain going to help me achieve them or prevent me from achieving them by the narratives that are already in the brain. And that's the time to then reframe our mind or change the narrative. Then we set goals. So the science says that it takes about 60 days to create a new habit. I say we need to go even further, because you could create the new habit, but if you go back to the old one, that new one would completely disappear. So this 90 days gives us time to work together when we set the goals, walk through the goals, hold each other accountable, talk about the challenges that you're encountering or could encounter, and then be intentional about the actions that you carry out. And doing this together with scripture, with science, with emotional intelligence, because emotions will come up and emotions can be quite powerful and in enhancing or even hindering from action, from you taking action. So it's using all this to really enable you achieve the goals. So we'll leave the link below. Have a look, come join us, and it will be, you will see the transformation. You will see how you would achieve goals that you've tried in the past to achieve and not achieve them. But most importantly, you'll be able to decide if the goals you're setting are actually the goals you should be setting, which is even more important than just writing the goals and achieving them. So yeah, we start on the 15th. And I hope you can join us.
Yeah. And until next time, it's been Maureen and Blessing chatting with you about goal setting. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.